I heard her call my name. So I walked into her room and she was sitting on the bed, but then out of the corner of my eye, I could see that somebody else was in the room. It was Quarles, and he had a really long knife in his hand.
In the late 1980s, men and women in the San Diego area were terrorized by a number of sexual assaults. Multiple women were attacked in their homes. Couples were violated in hotel rooms and apartment complexes. Victims were held for hours, while the suspect also stole their personal items. Eventually, police dubbed a name for their suspect, the bolder-than-most rapist. His name, Alvin Quarles. Good evening. We're taking a look at the case of Alvin Quarles. He's a repeat sex offender, now labeled sexually violent predator. In the 80s, Quarles was already on parole for sex crimes when he committed more than a dozen rapes. He pled guilty to 4 counts of rape while armed with a knife, 6 counts of residential burglary, and 2 counts of robbery. Quarles was sentenced to 50 years in prison, but served only half that time.
It was Sunday night. It was the last day of our holiday break, and the next morning was the first day back to work after winter break. It was also my sister Laura's birthday. And so I drove home. I walked in the door, and as I said, my roommate and I were not really friends. We were just living together. So I walked in the door, and the entrance is through the kitchen, and I heard her call my name. I remember I walked into her room and she was sitting on the bed, and she had a towel wrapped around her like she had just been in the shower, which is where she was. And I was like, hi. But then out of the corner of my eye, I could see that somebody else was in the room. And I remember my first thought was something like, who's your friend? And it was Quarles. And he had I didn't know it was Quarles this time. It was this person, and he had something wrapped around his face. It turns out it was one of our dish towels. And I remember he had a really long knife in his hand.
Mary Taylor is one of the 14 victims who came forward to report attacks in San Diego. This all happening between June of 1985 until February of 1988. She remembers hearing about a rapist on the loose, but never thought she would become a victim.
I had been reading in the paper about rapes going on, and then they started connecting the dots, and he got this name, the bolder than most rapist. And that, that catches your attention, do you remember the Pacific Beach rapist? I mean, I remember following that story too, but so I was sort of aware of it, but the stories at the time were talking about how he was mostly breaking into motels. So since I was living in a house in the suburban part of San Diego, you almost just assume that you are not, that's not something you have to worry about. And that, gosh, if there's a message for women out there, it's like, never make any assumptions about your safety. I had been aware that there had been a serial rapist in the community, and his name was the bolder than most rapists. And it wasn't until that night when the police came and we gave our story, they started saying to us, this sounds like that same guy. This sounds like the bolder than most rapist. The police later told us that it looked like he got in through a bathroom window that had a broken lock. It's amazing how guilty you feel afterwards. You feel like, what could I have done? One of the hardest outcomes, my mom and I struggled for a while. And I love my mom, and we resolved it. But when I first called her to tell her, my parents and my little brother was there too. But when I called to tell them what happened, and my mom, the first thing she said was, why didn't you run? And it immediately makes you feel like you made the wrong choice, and my mom and I we went through some tough times, and we both ended up actually going into therapy for a while, and we came out the other end of it, and we were fine, and we were good, and we were, even closer and stronger. But we definitely, like, that was one of the, you don't understand that when somebody is attacked, it's not just that person, it's everybody in their life.
Part of the MO for the Bolder Than Most rapist was to surveil or watch a location. Many times he would disable a lock in the bathroom, creating an easy access point for him and something residents really didn't notice. Remember, these crimes were committed in the 80s, long before cell phones. Reports show he would cut phone lines in motel rooms he was watching, something most people wouldn't think to look for when they check in. This prevented victims he attacked at motels from calling for help. By May of 1988, a bench warrant was issued for the arrest of Alvin Ray Quarles, also known as James Fort. Court documents show Quarles, also known as Fort, had already been convicted of sex crimes and was on parole for assault. But now Quarles was being charged with 58 counts of new penal code violations ranging from assault with a deadly weapon to theft and rape. Count 10. Alvin Ray Quarles did assault another with a deadly weapon and instrument by means of force likely to produce great bodily injury. Count 22. Unlawful sexual intercourse by means of force and fear. Count 37. By means of force and fear takes personal property from the victim. Count 52. Alvin Ray Quarles unlawfully enters a building with intent to commit theft or rape. While Quarles was in custody, officials left the suspect alone with paperwork containing victims' names and addresses. In jail, he reportedly took a hit out on one of the victims who was coming forward to testify. Authorities did not charge Quarles with attempted murder or any crimes related to those claims. Eventually, a plea deal was agreed to between the district attorney and Alvin Quarles. 58 charges that carried more than 200 years behind bars were whittled down to 4 counts of rape, 6 counts of burglary, and 2 counts of robbery. He was given a sentence of 50 years. Victims say they were told he would serve the full sentence in prison. However, after 25 years, Quarles was set to be released. Before being released from prison, the San Diego County District Attorney's Office filed a petition to have him civilly committed as a sexually violent predator, which means he would be a patient of the state under observation, but no longer an inmate. Quarles has also been diagnosed with sexual sadism disorder, voyeuristic disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. In July of 2014, he was committed to the Department of State Hospitals to undergo a sex offender treatment program. Coming up next, there's still more to the story. The SVP treatment program has been controversial from the start. Not only is it 4 times the cost of housing a death row inmate, but patients don't actually have to pass the program in order to be released from the hospital. We've got details coming your way after the break.